This week on the Endometriosis podcast, I will be talking with Jen Moore, founder of They Said What project. Jen is an educator, campaigner, public speaker, and as of today, a published author. As always, this episode is brought to you in proud partnership with Period Harmony, your go-to for drug-free pain relief. Let's dive into Jen's story, the inspiration for her book, Endometriosis. Her knowledge is vast, and I'm glad you're here to hear it. Hi, Jen. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm really good. It's a very, very exciting day for you today. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it doesn't quite feel real, but yeah, we're here. Thank you.
It's absolutely amazing. So your new book has been released finally.
Yes, today.
Awesome. Awesome. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your personal experiences with endometriosis that have inspired you to write this book.
Sure. So I always say my story isn't that unique. It kind of feels like everyone else's, if I'm honest. But I started having symptoms when I was 11. It was my first period, and my menstrual health education at school was pretty much non-existent, so I didn't really know what to expect. But I definitely didn't expect to be curled up on the floor of my parents' bedroom and screaming and just unable to even stand up, passing out from blood loss and pain. So my mum took me really early on to the doctors. She had a diagnosis of endometriosis herself, so she was able to recognise that this wasn't right, and she was obviously quite concerned. So we went very early on. I was 11 when we first went to the doctors, and I was just told that it's normal, that some of us are just unlucky, that as I get older it will settle down, and to just go on the pill. And that was it. I was told to go on the pill. That would help and solve everything. And that was where I was for 22 years. And for those 22 years, I did go back a lot to countless different doctors as I moved around the country. But again, same thing. They would say, this is normal. You just need to find a way to deal with it. Even if it was endometriosis. So when I raised it, I was just kind of made to feel like it was so unlikely that it could possibly be this thing, that it was very rare, that I was too young, that I hadn't had children, so it couldn't possibly be it. And then they would say that even if it was endometriosis, that I was on the pill. So that was all there was to do for endo anyway. So there's no point pursuing it. And it wasn't until 2021, during one of the lockdowns, that my friend and I started the world's smallest book club. It was literally just me and her, with just a little private.
That's brilliant. Lockdown was good for stuff like that, wasn't it? It was brilliant.
We never meant it to be anything other than just the two of us, but it just sounds so weird now when I say it's a book club and it's just two people. But we read Period Power by Maisie Hill. And it was the most menstrual health education I'd ever received in my life. And I was in my 30s at that point. And I suddenly realised that I had never experienced in inverted commas, natural cycle.
Right.
Natural is a very loaded term, but I had never experienced a full cycle off of the pill. So I decided to come off it. There was no other reason other than curiosity and lockdown madness or boredom. But within about 2 to 3 cycles, I'd say, the symptoms that had me completely debilitated on my period for 22 years had become every single day.
Oh my goodness.
I was pretty much bedbound on the days that I could get out of the house and out of my bed. I was collapsing from pain and blood loss. I had to start using mobility aids. I sold my business because there was no way I could carry on. It was just, I remember crawling from the bed to the bathroom one time. It was horrific, and things got bad really, really fast, like scarily fast. And my husband kind of said, look, this enough is enough. You'd had a handle on it for the last sort of however many years we'd been together at that point, but he was like, this is now beyond anything that I know how to help with. So I spoke to my GP again, and I had written every single symptom that I was experiencing. I didn't know at that time that endo was a full body disease. I still just assumed it was a period thing.
I only found that out recently as well, and I was like, I've had this for 26 years, since I was 14 was when I had my first burst cyst, so I probably had it before that, but 26 years, and I only found out, I think, a couple of months ago that it's a full body disease. So it's unbelievable that information's not there. And did the doctor tell you that? Or
No.
did you think that I,
Oh,
of course they didn't.
right. I think I just reached a point where I was so sick and tired of everything in my body. I didn't know they were connected at the time, but I just wrote it all down. And now I know that they were all connected to endo. But that doctor, they didn't explain that it was endo there. They just said, that doesn't sound right. I think you need a scan.
Yeah.
So I went for an ultrasound. The first medical imaging that I had done for any gynecological problem after 22 years was this ultrasound. And it came back as clear, which so many of ours do.
It always does.
Yep. And then, so I was told that no further treatment was needed, no further action was needed, and effectively I was discharged. But by that point, my parents were kind of really aware of how much this was completely ruining my life. They stepped in, and I am so grateful and privileged that they could do that.
Yes.
And they said, just go privately, whatever it takes, we will sort this. So I had an MRI, I think it was like 3-4 months after that first ultrasound. And that was when I was diagnosed with endometriosis and adenomyosis. So I had a surgery with that gynecologist. He's a very respected gynecologist, I can never say this with these two words together, a gynecological oncologist, very respected, with very complex surgery. And he performed a surgery on my body, and he diagnosed me as stage 2 endometriosis and very mild adenomyosis in 2022. And after that surgery, I was still in excruciating pain, not surgical healing pain, the same pain as before. And I told him that, and he, this guy, I thought this guy was amazing. He listened to me for the first time. He diagnosed me for the first time. I trusted him, and he just dismissed me like everybody else. He said that he was a surgeon, that he's done his job, that he thinks now my pain is psychosomatic, and that I need some therapy and to be aggressive with pain medication.
This was said to you when
2022, yeah.
Right, so I'm going to say something here that is shocking. So 2008, I had an internal in my own bed because my mum had to phone, when this when GP still came out to the house, she phoned the GP because I was standing. I had a band of pain around my stomach, and I was holding on to 2 pieces of furniture because I couldn't lie on my bed, I couldn't sit down, but I couldn't stand up, and I'm hanging like this, like screaming in pain. And the GP came out, and this GP had worked at the Sandiford Clinic in Glasgow and was really experienced in sexual health and things like that. But she came out, she basically forced me out of the bed, she injected me with morphine and cyclozine anti-sickness in my bed. Yeah, I don't know what they were at the time. I know now from all the surgeries. And told me that it was not acute pain. And I look back and I say, why was I not put in hospital then? Why you don't give somebody a morphine jack if they're not in acute pain? But what she said to me, she went to do the internal, and I was like screaming. I was like, it's sore. And she was like, and I was 23, so I think I was getting the whole like dramatic young girl vibe, whereas it was not what it was. She told me that I was in pain because I thought I was in pain.
Oh my God.
But Jen, see, to hear that you're being told that your pain's psychosomatic all these years later, and this is what I'm hearing, the more people I speak to are being treated the same way I was 20 years ago, are being disregarded the same way as I was 20 years ago. And I'm like, where's the progress? It's absolutely, I'm so destroyed to hear that you had that said to you within the past few years.
Yeah. And
how did you feel?
At the time, I was heartbroken. Like, I left that meeting and that appointment and I was crushed. And I said to my husband at the time, I said, not my husband at the time, I said at the time to your husband. Yeah. Husband.
He's still there.
And I said to him, I want a second opinion, because what had happened after that first surgery is that I started educating myself, and I realised how much I needed to educate myself to get the right care for these conditions. And I started realising just how important it was to see someone who specialises fully in this condition.
Yeah.
So I said to my husband, I want a second opinion. I'm not having that. And my husband, bless him, I always throw him under the bus. He's a really good guy, I promise.
That's what we do. That's what we do.
He was like, Jen, he's right though. Like, he is the surgeon. He's a really skilled surgeon. And you're a very intelligent woman, but you're not a surgeon. Maybe he's right. And then he said, but if you want a second opinion, let's do it.
Yeah,
and so
absolutely.
To see a specialist, or what I now know is a true specialist. And less than a year later, I was having really quite severe surgery, extensive surgery for severe endometriosis that I was at risk of double kidney failure because the first surgeon had missed so much disease in that area. We needed to do a hysterectomy because the adenomyosis was so severe that it was just the only thing left. I also had fibroids that had been missed in the first
How can they miss stuff like that
They
in
shouldn't.
this day and age? I mean, especially fibroids are quite visible.
Yeah. And my second surgeon looked at my first MRI and he said, I can see all of it on this
On
MRI
that.
because he knows what he's looking for. And that's the difference. It's
Yeah.
not that the first surgeon isn't a good surgeon. He is a very good surgeon. He
Yes,
just
in
doesn't
his
know
field.
endometriosis and
No,
adenoma.
you're totally right. And I put up a post recently about how we are all entitled to excision surgery and to see a specialist centre on the NHS. But the problem with that is still that the waiting list, even if you get past that and you write your letter to the GP, the waiting lists are just so long that unfortunately we do sometimes need to go private, and that's not an answer. That's not fair. That's a social issue. That's like saying, okay, so you have the money for this, so it's fine. When I was first diagnosed, my mum was terrified. I had no children. She wanted my eggs frozen. She wanted me to go private.
Yes.
Because I just got a diagnostic laparoscopy at my local hospital, and they said there was nothing they could do apart from a hysterectomy because I had a frozen pelvis and my ovaries were stuck to the back of my womb. They had done a ultrasound like you were talking about and they couldn't find my ovaries, but a junior doctor was saying, oh, they'll just be obscured by bowel gas. There'll be no problem. There'll be nothing, you're too young. You might have endometriosis, but we're not going in because if you do, it'll be stage 1 and the pill will be the treatment.
Yeah.
And luckily, she was overruled by a consultant who said, no, listen, let's just do a laparoscopy. And they just came straight back out because it would have been a hysterectomy. So then I did have to go to a specialist who was great. He does private work and NHS work. And he said to my mum, she's going to have to be on Prostap in the medical menopause for 10 months. He was like, so don't even bother going private because by the time she comes off the Prostap, like we can't do anything straight away privately anyway.
Right.
But I still feel like if they could, then that's what would have happened. And although it's the right thing for you and it was the right thing for me, it's just, it needs to be accessible to everybody. And like you're saying, your story is heartbreaking, but you're so self-aware in saying that it's not unique. But that makes it even more heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It's so relatable.
And actually, despite everything I've been through, I had it easier than an awful lot of people because I'm white, I'm well educated, I am confident, I am straight and very female presenting. I don't have any kind of, I have no systemic inequities and hurdles thrown at me other than that I'm a woman, which is a massive one. I'm not sort of discounting that, but you know,
But you're white, you don't have a disability out with endometriosis, can be
with
classed
cultural
as
stigmas, you know, gender-based stigma. I don't have to deal with all of that on top. And for me, that's the terrifying thing, that actually my 22-year-long journey that resulted in the loss of pretty much everything in my life was easy compared to most people, compared to a lot of people. And it's terrifying.
And you're so right about these issues, you're so right, because, you know, it can even be down to the way you present, the way you talk, that people, that they will take you more seriously. I was so young and a mess, and I remember saying to the registrar before I spoke to the consultant, I have been in the gynae ward now 3 months in a row. I'm going to lose my job. And at that point, I worked in education. So what she said to me was, oh, well, what do you work as? I said, I work in a school. So then it all seemed to happen. And my mum was she advocated so well for me as well. But I did kind of feel like, so what if I said I work in McDonald's? Would we not have wanted to go ahead with a laparoscopy? Like, it makes no sense. So that's such a valid point.
And we all have these biases, and we all have them. Everything, I still have them, you know. The important thing is to recognize them and then try and unpick them. But there is also the issue in medicine that these things have been baked in ever since it was founded and created, this medical system going, not just even the NHS, but like the medical system as we now know it, which goes back millennia. It has been baked into it from its very inception. And so to actually overcome all of these hurdles is increasingly difficult, and we have a real issue with accessibility in medicine.
Absolutely. You're just very, very informed. But you are now an author, a published author,
Thank you.
and also a public speaker and women's health advocate. So you're going to be very informed, Jen, which is one of the reasons I wanted you on the podcast, because you're fabulous.
Thank
So I was going to ask you, as a women's health expert, what motivated you to focus on endometriosis specifically in your book? Now, I feel like you've really kind of answered this. It's just because of your personal experiences. But I know that you do talk about other
you.
women's health conditions and adenomyosis
Mhm.
and PCOS.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
the book contains endometriosis, adenomyosis, and fibroids.
amazing.
So it kind of covers all of those conditions. The reason that I focused on those, so I currently am diagnosed with, I think it is 9 chronic illnesses, not including adeno and fibroids because they were technically removed. So I have
Oh,
a lot of chronic
goodness.
illnesses. And so it was very much a decision for me to focus my advocacy on endometriosis and adenomyosis and medical gaslighting kind of more broadly. The reason for that is because nothing has changed.
Okay.
Nothing has changed. And we've touched on this before, but I talked to my mum who went through, the exact same things that I went through. And she went through that decades ago. I
Yep.
see people that come up to me at events and they've brought their grandma along, and she's kind of saying, I now know what I have. But back
Yes.
then it was just impossible. And it's that really kind of made me realize that something just has to change. And I don't think, I don't want to dismiss anybody else with any other experience, of course, but I don't think that medical gaslighting exists as strongly in any of the other conditions that I have. So I think
Right.
fibromyalgia, painful bladder syndrome, cluster headaches, chronic migraine, it's all there to a but I have never experienced anything like it the way I have with endometriosis, adenomyosis, and fibroids. Before my hysterectomy, a surgeon told me that maybe it was a good job I was infertile because he had 3 children. So maybe my infertility will balance out the environmental impact of his. And I cannot think of a scenario where if my husband had walked in to talk about male infertility, that he would have been met with that kind of comment. Or, it just blows my mind.
Jen, I am sorry for butting in here,
No.
but I'm gobsmacked. And it takes quite a lot for me to be gobsmacked because I've heard all these nonsense comments from medical professionals and otherwise, but your infertility is balancing out the fact that he has 3 children. That is almost inhumane to say that to somebody. That is heartbreaking. That's soul destroying. And he should be struck off as far as I'm concerned. That's it. That's it. And I also do bet you, back to the gender thing, you probably wouldn't have said it if your husband was there.
Nope.
Wouldn't have happened.
No, I don't think it would. My husband since will not let me in an examination room with this man alone. He will do whatever he has to do to come with me. And he still is arrogant and dismissive and shocks my husband, who works in security. So he has seen his fair share of
Yeah.
arrogant people. But yeah, he would never have dreamed to have said it in front of him.
It's heartbreaking. Like, I'm so sorry that anybody in any walk of life felt like you could say that to you. But for somebody to say that in a professional environment to somebody who's struggled with fertility is just, I'm so sorry, Jen.
Oh, thank you. I'm always apologizing as well, but the one thing I really notice is that patients are all apologizing to each other, and there's no accountability from.
Yeah, the medical professionals aren't apologising.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely not.
I understand why we're saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry." It's because we actually know how that feels and what it's like, and so of course we're kind of bonding over this empathy and this medical trauma.
Yes.
But it would be very, very nice to occasionally see that phrase come out of the words of the people that have actually been letting us down for so long.
Absolutely. And people saying, well, I don't have endometriosis, but I'm still going to be sympathetic towards yours, which
Yeah.
our families and friends often are.
Yeah.
But that needs to be more widespread. Like, if I closed my work and said I broke my leg, oh my God, are you okay? Are you okay? Because there's a cast and it's visible, and are you going to be able to walk up the stairs? Sometimes I can't walk up the stairs because of my endometriosis,
Yeah.
but it's just treated so differently.
Yeah. And I think this pervasive link between endo and periods, they are linked, they sort of cohabit. often, not always, but they are, they definitely have a relationship. But endometriosis is not a period condition. But
No.
because medicine is still so wedded to this idea, it is, and is still kind of perpetuating that myth and this misinformation, it makes it hard for broader society to empathize, because they think, well, I've got a period and mine's fine, so I don't quite understand this. Or, they think, oh, but I grew up in a house with two sisters and a mum,
Yes.
and she never had these issues, so, I don't get it. And, this constant marrying of endometriosis as a period condition, which we know it's not.
It's absolutely not. And those kind of comments give undertones of everyone gets periods.
Yeah.
Especially when they come from women, and they're not saying that directly, and maybe looking into it too much, but these comments I still feel a bit like, yeah, no, that's not what this is. Somebody actually said to me earlier in the year, I was on a medication that stopped my period. It was not why I was on it. It just, as a side effect, it stopped my period. And I had mentioned it. I was like, oh, I've not had a period for 8 weeks. And the person said to me, and it was a female, and God bless her, it was not out of any badness. But she said to me, oh, well, that's great, is it not? And I says, no, why? I don't know if I'm perimenopausal or if it's this tablet. And then she says, yeah, but you won't be sore because you've not had a period. And I was like, okay. And I didn't even, and I looking back, I wish I had said actually and explained it, but I just kind of, in the environment that I was in, I just left it. I was like, right.
Exhausting to always have to do that educating as a patient, isn't it? Like,
that's it.
Constantly have to be the one to justify your existence, to, explain in great detail, actually, this is what it is. Like, that is exhausting. And one of the most amazing things my husband has done to support me is educate himself. And then he, in family settings or wherever it may be, he is the one then that says, oh, actually, it's this, rather than it always falling to me when I'm the one actually trying to deal with it.
Yes, having somebody else to advocate for you, to say, look, she's just having a bad day, or maybe you're nipping away to the toilet and he's able to say, like, just go easy on her today, like, she's tired, we might not be here for long.
Yeah,
And that's
exactly.
lovely that you've got that. That's excellent, because I don't think all partners are supportive or informed, but they'll learn, they'll learn by watching it.
Yeah, there's actually an interview with Chris in the book, because I feel quite strongly about this, about partners, and that they want to help, but they've just never been given the opportunity to fully understand this. And I asked him, like, what was your kind of menstrual health education like? And he's just like, no, there was nothing. Perhaps we were told to leave the room because they were now going to talk about girl stuff. And I was taught about wet dreams at school, but I wasn't taught that actually there's a whole menstrual cycle. You don't just have this random period that happens and comes out of nowhere.
They're still doing that. They taught my daughter. I was lucky enough to have one child. God bless, like, I think everything, every day. I had several miscarriages before and after her, but I do have a 14-year-old daughter. And I'm very careful about how often I speak about her in these situations, because it's hard. Her name is Hope, and I hope that it does bring some other people some hope who are still trying to conceive. However, she was taught about wet dreams, and I was like, well, like, that's not going to happen to you. Why does she need to know about that? And I'm not sure if the boys were removed, but when I was in school, same thing as your husband, the boys were out the classroom. This is quite funny, right? So they were out while the periods were talked about, but we were there while they were being told how to wash underneath their foreskin. Oh, I'm like, I don't need to know this.
I genuinely wouldn't mind learning that stuff, because, you never know, maybe one day I will have a son, or would have had a son. Like, so I don't mind learning that stuff, but as long as the boys are also learning
about the women.
Yeah.
But can you imagine being, we were 12. We were like, I'm not convinced that half of us girls even really knew how the anatomy down there was working, and suddenly they're talking about how to clean it. I'm like, wow. But anyway, Jen, I've got wildly off topic. Wildly. So I was going to ask you about, what are some of the common myths and misconceptions about endometriosis that you are addressing in your book? I'm just so excited to read it.
Thank you. That means a lot. And there's a lot of them, isn't there? A lot of them. I think some of the most stubborn ones are this myth that it's a period condition or a uterine condition. And I think if we can move away from that one, a lot of the others will fall into line. So if we kind of accept the disease knowledge that is there, that this is not a period condition, it's a full body systemic inflammatory condition.
Yeah.
And if we start looking at it in that way, the myth that menopause is a cure falls away. The myth that hysterectomy is a cure, that suddenly becomes untenable. The myth that going on the pill will cure it or shrink it, that becomes untenable. So if we start with this myth of endometriosis as a period or a uterine condition, that it's just the lining of the womb that's growing in other places, which we know it's not. If we start there, it's kind of the foundation of a lot of the other myths that they're built on. And it's kind of very shaky but stable house of cards all at the same time. And if we really kind of chip away at that one at the foundation, I think the house of cards will start to tumble. But it is the most stubborn one. And unfortunately, it's the one that doctors are still taught at medical school. If they're taught anything about endometriosis at all, they are still taught that it's the lining of the womb found in other sites, and that the pill does wonders and can shrink it or cure it or mop it up after surgery, or that hysterectomy is the kind of gold standard, which my friend was taught last year. It's, if we get that right, if we get the definition right, everything else will fall into line. Because if you don't know what it is, how on earth do you know how to treat it properly and manage it properly? Research.
Absolutely.
You just can't.
And it's all about terminology. So when I was first diagnosed, I did say to people, it means I've got endometriosis, and it means that my womb lining grows outside my womb. End story. Whereas now I'll say I have endometriosis that has a ton of symptoms, and one of them is that it makes my womb lining grow outside my womb. Like you would say, maybe with fibromyalgia. One of the symptoms, my mum has it, so I know a bit about it. One of her symptoms of fibromyalgia is fatigue, but fatigue is not fibromyalgia. So these deposits outside our wombs are not what endometriosis is. They are a symptom of a bigger disease, like you say.
Yeah, exactly. Painful periods and heavy periods, they are symptoms, they are not diagnoses, but currently they are being given to countless women and girls as a diagnosis. But endometriosis itself is even more complex. So it isn't even the lining of the womb in other places. It's cells that are similar to the lining of the womb, but they are
There we go.
different. Yeah.
There we go.
This is the thing. We are all learning every single day about this disease, but they are, if you look at them under a microscope, they are completely different in structure, behavior, how they grow, what they do to cells. We don't know how they get there. There is no concrete answer as to what causes it. The one that currently has most favor with global experts is that we are born with these endometriosis cells, and that something happens to sort of trigger them, to trigger that inflammatory process that then starts the proliferation of these cells. But we're all learning so much about it every day. And I think it's amazing how much we do know that hasn't been sort of filtered through to.
Well, I mean, I should have known that. If I was the type of person that was too proud, I would crop this from the podcast, but I'm not going to, because I'm going to use it as an example of somebody who has had her first birth cyst 26 years ago, has just said, this is how I explain endometriosis to people. And you very politely said, yeah, you're not spot on there. That's what it's all about. It's a continuous learning curve. But if I don't know that, then how are people, like, there must be loads of people who have endometriosis that don't even understand the own disease that they have. It's heartbreaking.
And even more concerning is the amount of doctors that say they are able to treat it that don't know that. That think
Absolutely.
that it's the womb. And so they say the pill's a cure, hysterectomy is a cure. You know, if we get rid of these organs that govern the period, so the ovaries, the uterus, then it will put a stop to endometriosis. But we know that's just not the case, because I'm sat here now and I had very skilled excision surgery and a hysterectomy. I now have endometriosis again on multiple organs. So we know that it is nothing, you know, it is not the driver behind this disease, is not our reproductive organs. And it produces its own estrogen anyway. it's, so removing the ovaries, it might help with symptoms because you're not going through potential flares and sort of
Yes.
peaks of hormones, but it produces its own anyway. So it's
Did you have your ovaries removed, or have you still got your
no,
ovaries?
so I still have my ovaries. That's kind of the preferred way to go about things if
Uh-huh.
there's no real reason to remove it.
Hmm.
They're a bit temperamental, I'll be honest. They obviously went through a lot of trauma. They've had
Yes.
endometriomas in the past. So I'm not quite sure how well they're working, but they are still there. And so one thing that I was never prepared for is that I will still experience a cycle, even though I don't have a
Yeah.
period. And
Uh-huh.
it sounds so logical now, but you know what you were just saying about how we're all learning about this stuff?
Mhm.
It never occurred to me that I would still get mood changes, skin changes, all of that stuff that we associate with your period and your cycle.
Because your cycle's still
All
there,
of it.
you're just not
Yeah.
bleeding.
I just
Yeah.
don't bleed. And so
I
we call
know,
my
and it's
ghost
hard to
period
explain
now.
to people as well,
Yeah.
because like you say, so I'm 40, so I think, what age are you, Jen, if you don't mind saying? You're 36, so I'm a few years older than you, and at 40, even still, it wasn't the preferred method
Mm,
to remove my ovaries, but I lost one of my ovaries in my 20s, so I only had my left tube and ovary left, and they did take it, but they took it because I had been diagnosed last year with PMDD, so it was taken for that reason,
yeah. That makes
um, so that I could go into HRT and not have a cycle.
that makes sense, yeah.
So I think it is just understanding what and when and why and what helps, because I did as well think if I just got the hysterectomy then that would be fine.
Mm,
And then I realised, no, if this ovary stays, I'll still have a cycle. And I was like, oh, no. And then I've had also had estrogen related pulmonary embolisms, which I always got when I was either pregnant or after I had my daughter, was my first
mm,
one. And my gynecologist needed permission from haematology to remove the ovary
mm,
because HRT can cause blood clots. But because I've had multiple, I'm lifelong anticoagulated. I take blood
mm,
thinning injections every day.
yeah.
So they did approve it. And I was just so relieved. And the whole PMDD thing is a whole different story, and I could talk about it forever. But that had such an effect on my life that I'm already feeling 6 weeks post op I'm still adjusting, and they're still up and down in the HRT, but not having a cycle for me has been an excellent decision. And I think that's why it's all about there's not one, because the next thing I was going to ask you about was treatment options for
Mm,
endometriosis, but it's just not a one size fits all.
no.
But what's helped you the most out of everything you've had done?
So, I mean, as you say, there's no algorithm that we can follow. We're all very, very different. It depends where we've got endometriosis, and that will then impact what symptoms we have, and that, it's all so individual. For me, the biggest thing that helped was excision surgery
Yep,
with an expert, just
yep,
to caveat it. That to me gave me the most relief for the longest period of time. Still haven't had a pain-free day, and obviously I still have endometriosis now. Yeah, that was the biggest thing for me was a surgery. But more than that, it was what surrounded the surgery. So it was the pelvic floor physiotherapy that I was given with
uh-huh,
it. It was the nutritional advice that I was given alongside
yep,
that. It was the real
yeah.
multidisciplinary team that kind of supported that surgery. And that's been the biggest thing for me.
That's excellent, because I didn't have any of that. So
Mm,
I'm so glad to hear that you had that, because this operation was NHS and I didn't have any kind of support about nutrition, or even asked to, do you want to speak to somebody about your emotions or mental health.
yeah.
I
Yeah.
feel like that kind of should have been checked up on, and I'm like, okay. But
Yeah.
I'm so glad to hear that you did have that experience.
It was
And
something that
that's,
I pushed for, so I had to fight for it, and most of it at the time we paid privately for.
yeah,
It is now sort of 2 years on from that surgery, and I have an NHS pelvic floor physio, NHS
brilliant.
dietitian, but it's not something that was kind of offered up on a platter.
Uh,
It was something that, again, I had educated myself that I knew would
yes,
help, and then I fought for it. But again, that's the infuriating thing. Patients should not have to advocate and fight for care as hard as we do with these diseases. It's terrifying in a way. I speak to people and they're like, oh, why would that help? Why would pelvic floor physio help your endometriosis? And
Yep.
it's again that constant educating that we have to do as patients, even to other healthcare professionals. I was under pain management clinic and they had a physio there. And I said to him, I'd like to talk about pelvic floor physio. And he was like, why would you want that? Like, are you having bladder leakage? Because all they'll do is help with bladder leakage and to, tighten things up. And I was like, well, no, I don't suffer with that. And actually, I need the reverse. I'm too tight. I need help to relax them. And he
Yeah.
was like, well, that's not what they do. That's pointless. And so he refused to do it. And it's just, it's everywhere you look when it comes to these conditions. It's the constant lack of understanding of them that then falls to patients to pick up. And it just,
Absolutely. There's a question I usually ask at the end of every podcast, and it is, what would you recommend to somebody else suffering from endometriosis? And every single person has said the same thing, and it's advocate for yourself. And I love it. I love it. It's so true. I would say the same thing, but I want us to be at a stage where we don't have to do that.
yeah.
Now we do, and that's what will make the progress and bring the change about, that we, us advocating now, will change for people in the future. Does
Yeah,
that make sense?
it does.
But it's absolutely the first thing people say, and it just makes me sad, because I'm like, well, somebody with a heart problem does not have to advocate for themselves, because the doctors are informed, the doctors know what they're doing, and we're not sitting there having to look things up and fight our case and say, no, I think this, and this. I mean, don't get me wrong, it can happen with other illnesses,
Yeah, of course.
absolutely, and I'm sure there are people with heart conditions that have had to advocate for themselves. But with women's health, it's unbelievable.
I
It's
think the biggest
unbelievable.
contrast to me is my husband. And I asked him, only because he's male and I'm very close to him, so I can speak to him about these things. But I asked
Um,
him, have you ever gone to the doctor more worried about being believed than what your symptoms might mean? And he looked at me like I had grown 3 heads. He was like, why would you, like, what? And he
yeah.
didn't get it. And I just said to him, that is what it is like every single time I go
Yes.
to an appointment, no matter what the specialism. I go in there as if I have to negotiate, as if it's like some board meeting.
Yeah.
I go in prepared. I know what I need to do. I've got my questions. I've got what I want to get across. I've got past test results on that file. And I've got,
Yeah.
and it is a negotiation. And he looked at me like, that's crazy. I just turn up and I tell them what's wrong and they treat me and I go home. He's like,
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I wish it was that easy, and it is, especially if you're meeting a new specialist or even a GP. I moved house recently, not far, but I had to change my GP surgery. Don't get me wrong, they've been excellent, but I totally get you. When I was first going for my first appointment there, I was terrified, because my doctor that I had before, my GP, he understood. And I was like, I don't want a different one. What if they don't get it? What if and they have, but I should never have been having to feel anxious about that. And
yeah,
I've not really thought about it, and you've
yeah.
just hit it
The most
straight on the
extreme
head,
case of
Jen.
it that I know is my mum, and she is unfortunately quite unwell with various things that are very tricky to sort of get a hold on. And
I'm
we
sorry
talked
to
about
hear
them
that.
maybe, thank you. And we talked about them maybe moving to here. So they still live in Wales, where I'm from
Uh-huh.
originally. I live in Cambridge, and we talked about this a few years ago. And they said we can't move outside of our doctor's catchment area
Uh-huh.
because they are so worried
Yep.
that the amazing doctor that she currently has won't, they won't get that anywhere
Yep.
else. And so it is actually sort of impacting this life choice, this
Yep.
huge decision about where they live
Yeah.
because they're so fearful of having to go through that process again and again and again.
And
And
that's just so sad. It's so
yeah,
sad. Like you say, that it's a huge, massive, life-changing decision,
mhm,
and having to even factor that into that decision, it's unbelievable. It is absolutely unbelievable. And you touched on this already, but I was going to ask you, in terms of the book or just in your experiences, is there any advice you could give us on the role of lifestyle changes such as
mm.
diet and exercise to manage endo?
So this is a bit of a hot topic at the moment, I think. And the
Yeah.
important thing to remember is what works for one doesn't necessarily work for another one. So it's
Yep.
very, very individualized. And also that nothing you do, don't do, don't take, eat, don't eat causes your endometriosis. Okay, so there should be no kind of expectation of you're not doing enough unless you're
Yep.
doing all of this stuff. That said, lifestyle changes can really help some people manage their symptoms. And it ranges all the way from trying to improve sleep quality to dietary changes, movement. But exercise is a really interesting one because for me personally, it can be really triggering. So any kind of strenuous exercise, that's it. My symptoms will flare and they will be angry. So it's important to remember you don't have to go to an extreme either. So for me, really gentle sort of Pilates and yoga is much more effective than any kind of gym workout. Diet, which is sort of like the holy grail almost a little bit. A lot of people kind of say that they have this endo diet. There is no one endo diet that is going to help, because what triggers me might be fine for you, might be somebody else's, absolutely has to cut it out completely. There are certain things that we can assume for most people will be beneficial, and that's broadly following an anti-inflammatory lifestyle.
Right.
Endometriosis is an inflammatory condition, so anything we can do to kind of lower that inflammatory environment is by and large meant to be helpful for the vast majority of us. That includes things like sleep, stress reduction, anti-inflammatory foods, cutting out anything that's sort of overly processed. For me, two really big ones are alcohol and caffeine, so I try to avoid those completely. But other things I've noticed that so gluten, for example, is one that's often said, oh, cut it out. I don't need to cut out gluten because it's not one of my main triggers. But what I have noticed is that the quality of the product that gluten is in makes a big difference for me. So but then again, we talked about this at the start about accessibility. For lots of people, actually, that's just not possible. They can't afford to get the organic, high quality, wild salmon and brown, what's the way, like grains, all those kind of things. Then it's just not possible. And actually, when I'm in a flare, there is no way I'm standing at the kitchen and preparing kind of like a
from scratch.
that anti-inflammatory rainbow of food. I'm grabbing a packet of hula hoops and I'm going back to bed and putting my heat pad on.
Exactly. And you don't want to feel that shame that, okay, so I'm not following the strict anti-inflammatory diet, so I'm doing this to myself. Like, it's almost like victim blaming. So I have started the anti-inflammatory diet as of last week. My diet, I don't have a lot of processed foods in general, but I've cut out now dairy just to see if it helps, and to help the wee one as well. And my food shopping was almost twice what I spend on a usual week. And yes, I do like cooking, but this is like super cooking from scratch. And there's nights where I do not want to do that. There is nights where I'm too tired, I am too sore, and I don't want to feel any shame surrounding I've not cooked this meal tonight. Although I spoke to somebody recently and they said 80-20, and I loved this. It was, if you're meeting your goals, like your sleep hygiene goals, your nutrition goals, 80% of the time, it's still going to help you. And that 20% of the time when you're too tired or you just want a takeaway, do it. And I was like, wow, I really, really like that.
Yeah, I think there is this kind of, or there can be certainly online, this sort of, unless you're doing this, you're not serious about it, or it can't be as bad because you're not willing to do everything you can. And do you know what? No, I don't like any of that. I think it's awful. And I actually spoke to a lot of people for the book about this. One that really stuck out for me was that actually this kind of anti-inflammatory thing, in some ways it's a very kind of Western-centric view. Because one girl was telling me that she is from Africa, she's from West Africa, and she was told by a nutritionist online that she has to cut out all of her cultural food, all of her home cooking food. She was told, no, you need to cut that out. If you want to help your endometriosis, you absolutely have to start eating a proper diet. And what she meant by that was a Western diet.
Which isn't really the best diet at all. No. Plus, for that woman,
so much
our diet's our diet's part of our culture, which is part of our identity. I don't think we should be recommending to take that away from people.
Yeah, exactly. And her diet is really naturally anti-inflammatory anyway. It includes loads of turmeric and all these spices that, we're seeing put into supplements and then sold to us. Her cultural cooking included all of that. And yet she was being told, oh, no. You need to get rid of that. You need to eat proper food, was the words. And it just, again, it just made me think like we need to stop looking at this one size fits all approach And that includes lifestyle changes as well, not just the medical ones.
That's such excellent advice. And like you say, not one size fits all, not this is the answer, just trying different things and being mindful without shaming ourselves if we have a little bar of chocolate,
The
a
one
little
thing I
pudding.
heard that I thought was so perfect to sum that up was the only person you should be comparing with is yourself. So,
Great.
make those changes. If they work for you, that's amazing. Do them as much as you can. And
Yep.
if they don't make a difference, then that's okay. Try something else. Like the
Yeah.
only person to compare with is yourself.
That goes for everything,
Yeah.
absolutely everything. And I'm just going to move on quickly to emotional and psychological aspects
Mm.
of endometriosis, because I'm sure that you're going to have your book. I'm so excited to read it. I've not read it yet, but I am pretty sure that's going to be touched on. And I
Yeah.
was wondering if you wanted to say anything on that.
So there's a whole chapter on mental health, and I say in that
Brilliant.
chapter that basically this could be a whole book in itself.
Yes, absolutely.
The mental health side of living with a condition like endometriosis is so complicated because it's effectively this vicious cycle. We kind of say, inflammation is a huge, result of stress, which then feeds
Mhm.
endometriosis, which then makes us super stressed because we're in pain. It's causing us to miss out on everything. We're giving up careers, fighting for ourselves all the time. And then that
Yep,
leads to more inflammation. And so we're in this really vicious cycle. But there is no way that living with one of these conditions will not impact your mental health
yep,
because it sucks. There is
yep,
no two ways about it. It's
yep.
but at the same time, we've also had our mental health used to dismiss us. We're
Yes,
told it's just stress. We're told to calm down. We're told that we're
yes.
being too emotional, too dramatic. And so they have endometriosis and mental health has this really complicated relationship
Mm,
where it's kind of obviously this amount of pain and loss and the impacts on our lives going to impact our mental health. And yet we're also told it's all in your head. It's just your
yep,
mental health. So it's such a complicated topic. But I think what we don't talk about enough is the extent. It's very easy to say, oh, it, impacts my mental health. But to share my own experience, I was suicidal. Before my second surgery, I was suicidal. And I didn't realize I was suicidal. I didn't put that word to it. I didn't label it.
yep,
But I literally could not see a life beyond pain at that point in my life.
yep,
All I saw was pain. And
yep.
in my head, I was just saying to myself, I don't want to live like that life. That's not a life I want. And so it took
No,
me,
I understand you. It's like a feeling of, if this is how my life is going to be, I can't do it.
yeah,
And I literally said to my mum, when I was screaming the day that I spoke about, I was screaming and I was saying, I want to die, I want to die. And the only reason I wanted to die was so the pain
would stop.
would stop.
Yeah. And that's exactly how it was. And so for a long time, I didn't equate that with being suicidal because I
Hmm.
didn't have active thoughts of doing that or how to do it.
Yep.
And so in my head, my sort of very narrow-minded view of what it was, I was
Hmm.
like, oh no, I just didn't want to live. I just wanted the pain to stop.
Yep.
It was only going to therapy and really unpicking that I realized what the extent of that and the impact
Yep.
of that, and it really shook me. And I think we say, oh, it has mental health impacts, and policymakers will put a statistic on it, but it's not until you actually talk to somebody who genuinely cannot see a way to carry on living because of their pain, and they think that is the only way to stop their pain. It is mind blowing to me that we are not taking more urgent action on that. I spoke to someone the other day and she has given me permission to share this as I talk
Uh-huh.
about things. And she's actively looking at assisted suicide
Oh no.
currently because she just cannot get help. She cannot afford private help. And that is where she's at. She cannot contemplate carrying on living as she is and with the system as it currently is to help her. And it really.
It's just, and I don't mean on her part, but that's
Mhm.
just wild. That is just,
Mhm.
I totally actually understand where she is coming from,
Yeah,
100%. When I say that's wild, I mean it's wild that in this day and age,
yeah,
we have women who feel like that. That
that's the best
is
option.
beyond heartbreaking. But if I was in that pain that I was that day and have been several times before and several times after, will experience again. If I was in that pain all the time, no, there's no life.
Yeah.
There's no life. And that, I'm so glad you're talking about this,
Yeah,
because
and
you've
yeah.
also made me reflect, because I would never have said, oh, I was suicidal with that pain, but I was standing saying, I want to die, I want to die. And that is what that is.
It's
I've
hard.
just never framed it as that.
Yeah.
And is she going to be able to get more help, or is she quite...
We hope so. We've, tried to point her in some directions, but ultimately it is her choice. But yeah, we're doing all we can to support her, and also make sure that relevant bodies are involved to provide that support. But once again, it's coming down to patients to support each other.
Yes.
It is infuriating and heartbreaking and enraging and all of the above, all of the above. But
So we're not supposed to get angry though, right? Because we're women.
Yes, can't be too angry, can't be too emotional. But
No.
no, that's absolute nonsense. My husband took me to a rage room last year, and it was the best thing I've done in ages.
Oh, tell me
We
about
had it
that.
all out. Honestly, it's just this room. You're basically in a room with a whole bunch of crockery, plates, mugs, ceramics, old electrical equipment. It would all ended up in landfill. So they've bought it instead and they use it in these rooms. And then you basically are given a scaffolding pole or a baseball bat and you can choose your music and you're all in safety gear and you just let loose. And it was the most
Wow.
cathartic thing I have ever done.
Did you feel great
I
afterwards?
felt so light afterwards. It was the weirdest thing. And I keep saying somebody needs to organise like an endo rage room somewhere because it was the best feeling just to let everything out. It was
That
so
sounds
good.
amazing, just like emotionally as well. Just
Yeah.
going like, "Wah! I don't have to keep like, my head together." I don't, because we've always constantly got to show up for our
Yeah.
families, for our work, and the
Yeah.
pressure, the build up, and just I don't need to.
Let
I could just
loose.
smash the place up. I love
Yeah.
that. My
Should
goat one.
probably disclaim that I'm not a mental health professional, so that is not probably the most healthy way to deal with it. But for me, it was an incredible day.
I think that sounds like a great way. Again, I'm not a professional either.
No, I can just picture some of my psychology friends saying, Jen, that is probably not the healthiest strategy, but
Well, it
it
worked.
worked.
It worked.
It worked.
So, how can readers of your book get involved? I know you're really involved in public speaking and
Mhm.
advocacy. If somebody who was reading your book wanted to get involved in that, what would you recommend to them?
So there is actually a whole bit in the book about if you want to get involved and what you can do. My first
Excellent.
piece of advice is always start small and start
Uh-huh.
with what angers you the most. So for me, it's medical gaslighting and it's clinical education. So those were my starting points, and that's where I kind of focus my work. Because the problem is we are in a situation where there is a juggernaut of
Mhm.
misinformation, lack of understanding, stigma that's been built up over such a long period of time.
Yeah.
No one person is going to change that. No one charity, no one government, no one NHS head, no matter what it is. It's going to take a huge, huge, huge collaborative effort to kind of slow that juggernaut and then start
Yep.
to turn it around. And so that's always my advice. It's to think about what you're good at, think about what angers you the most,
Mhm.
and think about what you actually have capacity and energy for. Because a
Yes.
lot of the time I'm asked that question by patients.
Yeah.
And the most important thing, if you're a patient with endometriosis, is that you're looking after yourself, that
Uh-huh.
you are getting the support that you need, and your health is taken care of and put first. So those
Absolutely.
are the three pieces of advice, really. It's making sure you know what your capacity is,
Yep.
knowing that you don't actually have to do this either. It could be
Uh-huh.
as small as just having an open conversation with someone in your family who you've
Yep.
hidden the extent from, or asking for, support for yourself at work. That's actually a huge piece of advocacy because it starts the conversation for everybody else in the office and that comes after you. So advocacy doesn't have to be standing up in Parliament and speaking. It can be. That's
Mhm.
amazing if it is, but it's also about those small actions that really build up. So yeah, thinking about what you've got capacity for, thinking about your skill set, because we all have very different skills. And
Absolutely. And that's huge. And it's working together. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly.
That's excellent advice, Jen. That's like you say, because we're dealing with people who have a chronic illness, whether it's endometriosis alone, and all too often we know endometriosis comes with other chronic conditions.
Mm-hmm.
So it's knowing your kind of limits and your capacity. And actually, I love that. I love that. And I'm just so excited about reading this book.
Oh, thank you.
So How would you like to see research going forward and evolving within the next few years?
That's a really good question. So currently, to give kind of a bit of a context to it, we are massively lacking in funding when it comes to conditions like endometriosis. And where funding is allocated, it isn't always allocated in a way that patients actually want. So we get an awful lot of funding into hormonal intervention. We know hormonal intervention can work as symptom management for some people, and yet we're still funneling into it, kind of like trying to prove that it's something else. So it sometimes feels a little bit backwards. There's cases in previous years of funding going into things like attractiveness levels of women with endometriosis and just really bizarre kind of topics. Yeah, so it was an Italian paper, and it was looking at the attractiveness of women with a particular type of endometriosis and their breast size. And it was eventually retracted. It took years to be retracted, and it was only because of outcry from patients that it was. And they kind of there was no apology. They stick by.
Oh my God. No.
But yeah, so I would like to see research that patients actually want, that, and involving patients in that from the start. Because what we quite often see is a tick box exercise where at the end, where kind of it's already been decided, but at the end they'll bring a patient in, ask them to share their trauma so they can use a nice quote in the report. And then, that's the sort of extent of the patient involvement.
It's tick box,
Really, it's to add a little bit of spice, to ask them to share their trauma so they can use a nice little, whatever the written equivalent of a soundbite is, and send it away. So I would like to see research that truly collaborative research with patients in a meaningful way, actually giving them a voice on a steering group so they can actually say what's important. I would like to see research into diverse experiences, because currently we just don't know. What we do know is that Black women, for example, can be up to twice as long as the average diagnosis times for endometriosis, which when they're already at a decade is appalling.
That is appalling.
So we really need to start researching diverse experience and working with those communities to understand their experience and how they can be supported properly. And I would also like to see research into a cure. I am so sick of seeing this groundbreaking research press releases that are actually talking about the same old drugs, just repackaged and relabeled. And they're not curative. They are symptom management at best. They can make things worse for some. And they come with a whole raft of side effects that actually can make living with them just as hard as living with the disease. So that's what I would like to see. It's probably not a simple question, but it's a very simple answer, but it's a very big question. But yeah.
No, it's a brilliant answer, and you've touched on so much. And I had mentioned my experience earlier being on Prostap, which was the medical menopause. So I was 23 at the time, and I will attribute some of it to being psychological, because I'd also just found out what was going on with my body, and it wasn't easy. But the Prostap sent me, like, I don't even know the appropriate word. I was not okay. I was not okay, and I'm at the doctor's it was 10 months long, and I'm on like month 5, and I'm like, I'm really not coping. Like, I'm not coping mentally. I feel like I'm losing my mind. And they basically told me, well, if you want this surgery and you want a chance at ever being able to try and conceive, then this is what you need to do. And which was true. I'm not saying they lied to me, but I'm sitting there trying to figure out that I'm making this choice at 23 between my mental health and my physical health. And I stuck with it ultimately, but it changed me forever. And I try not to be too negative about it, because it might work really, really well for other people.
Absolutely.
But I won't touch it. And even the pill didn't agree with me. And I think maybe finding out that I had PMDD, I'm now like, right, okay, that's probably why I had such a bad reaction. But it definitely, these hormone treatments for a lot of people, I'm not the only person that's reacted like that. They're not the answer. They can help, like you say, but then more side effects.
And for some people, they genuinely
a minefield.
It is. And for some people, they genuinely, these hormonal interventions can help them live their life. They are life-changing. They get them through the day. And that's incredible.
Can you hear that?
I am not anti-hormonal intervention. For some people, it can save their life in terms of it, gets them through the day. What I am against is the lack of informed consent that we currently have in endometriosis care, because if you are not given the full information and it is accurate information, you are not able to give informed consent. And sometimes patients are told that these, very, very strong chemical menopause drugs are going to cure them. Even the manufacturers of these drugs don't claim that. They used to, but now they have swapped to saying it can help with symptom management. But doctors aren't always updating that information when it comes to patients. And you can't give informed consent if you aren't given the correct information. That's what I'm against, not people getting the relief that all of us desperately need from whatever means it is. It's making sure you are making that choice based on accurate, up-to-date, full information.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And I was going to ask you how you feel about, and there's no right or wrong answer here, about technology and mobile apps playing a role in endometriosis care and management, because this is a new thing I've seen and I find it quite interesting, and I'm just wondering, with your expertise, how you feel about those kind of things.
So symptom tracking is hugely important when you live with a condition like this. It can help you put patterns together, it can help you speak the language of a doctor, and it allows you to give your doctor a huge amount of data when you only have 10 minutes. So it really is helpful. Now, how you do that symptom tracking is entirely up to you. So yeah, symptom tracking is hugely, hugely important. I didn't quite accommodate what I was going through. I don't know if they're better now, but even just a few years ago, I would be told that, I would try to log that it was 75 days since my last period, and I was told, no, that's not right, that's impossible. So for me, they were a little bit limited in what they would allow me to do. So I just tracked with pen and paper, but I am a bit old school anyway. I like a bit stationary. I mean, technology in healthcare is only going to increase, whether that's apps, AI, all of this stuff, it is going to increase. What we need to make sure is that it's safe. So your data is safe and protected, especially in today's climate where we know that, these apps and the data that they hold are hugely valuable to all sorts of people. So it's making sure that your data is protected and safe. And also making sure that patients are involved with the creation of these. So very similar to research. If patients aren't involved, then we're going to get the same outcomes that we're getting at the moment. So they have huge potential.
Yeah.
I just think we need to maybe be a little bit cautious and slow it down maybe a little bit with the hype, and make sure that these platforms are actually A, safe, and B, beneficial to the patients that they say they're trying to help.
So I had kind of, when I had came up with that question, it was a few days ago, so I hadn't seen it, but I seen a thing last night where somebody was saying, and I'm not sure how totally accurate this is, but it was somebody saying that the police in the United States could access your period app tracking. And today I'm going to deep dive right into this and see if it's true, because mine's gone, but my daughter has one, and I really think we'll be going back to the pen and paper if that's the case. And not because I'm concerned about our cycle or the police needing her cycle. I just find it really, really bizarre. I'm just almost shocked by it.
Reproductive data is hugely valuable, hugely valuable. And it isn't just for, purposes of law enforcement and the kind of scary side of it. Hugely valuable for marketing. So when you know that a woman is in a particular phase, you can tailor ads to her.
Got you.
So, it sounds really trivial, but when you know that they're at their most fertile, they're feeling really good about themselves, you can target makeup and clothing and high heels. If you know that they're actually towards their period, you can target food and comfort items and hot water bottles or pain medication. So it's
Mood supplements and right. This is okay.
Hugely valuable, and that's why I'm so interested in the court case that's coming up in the States about the leak of data from some of these tracking apps. The data that you potentially input is worth an awful lot to an awful lot of people. That's not me demonizing these apps, it's just to
They're
make
really
sure.
can be really helpful, but we need to know the full
Yeah,
story. We've got a habit of just pressing allow, allow, allow when we
yeah,
download apps. Everybody does it, you know.
yeah.
And I know people that don't, and that's great. I should be and I will be from now on.
Mm. I mean, if I'm honest, I don't remember the last time, when you have to scroll through all the stuff and then you put accept terms and conditions. I don't remember the last time I ever actually read them. And that's being perfectly honest. I just scroll to the bottom, click accept as fast as I can. But when you start thinking about what your data could mean to so many people, it definitely makes you think maybe I should be a little bit more cautious about these things. But that's not to scaremonger either. Apps do have protections and there are protections embedded into law. It's more just something to be aware of. And again,
Yeah,
I do cover this in the book because I think it is so, so important. And there are tips in there about protecting your data online as well. But it's just something to be aware of. And pen and paper is also just really helpful. I just used my diary when I was tracking my symptoms and it told me everything I needed to know. So sometimes they can actually be a little bit restrictive because you're not able to track everything that you
uh-huh.
want to do. So yeah, there's lots of pros and cons. Huge potential.
And so, what's the main message that you hope readers will take away from your book? I know there's so much in it and so many messages, but for you, what would be, if you could had to pick the one main thing, what would it be?
That there's hope, that endometriosis is hard to live with, but there are still ways to live with it. It's not kind of a life sentence. It's not a guarantee fertility issue. It's not guaranteed that you will end up with having, very extensive endo. It is so individual. And I think
Yeah,
if we remember that and remember to focus on what works for us and not comparing, I think that would be really helpful for all of us. It would have helped me, certainly, in that time where I just couldn't see a life beyond pain. And my life is different. There isn't an area of my life that endometriosis hasn't changed, but
yeah,
different doesn't always mean worse. Sometimes it just means different. And I love my life. Is it the one
yeah,
I would have chosen or thought I had? I don't know, maybe not. But it's still full and it's still exciting and fun, and it isn't just all about endo. I'm so much more than that. And I hope other people that read the book have that same kind of realization that there is still the
yeah.
human underneath all of this. And yeah, that's the one thing I think.
I love that. I actually love that. I think you've got such a attitude of gratitude, as Scottish people say.
Okay.
And you're still able to appreciate the good things in your life. And I know there'll be times where the hard times take over from that. But like any other chronic illness, it's okay, I have this, it's not going away no matter what happens. But here I'm now informed and I've got a better understanding and I can continue this with more information.
Exactly.
And that's excellent.
I want to
And
get
the
you
final thing I
involved.
wanted to ask you, Jen,
Yeah.
was if there were any upcoming events, webinars, or online resources that you'd like to promote to the audience, if you've have anything coming up relating to your book.
So we are currently planning some events around the country. So I will most definitely share all of the details as soon as I know them. So I would just say keep an eye on my Instagram. And they'll be
Excellent.
updated there. But yeah, we are trying to organise some really exciting things around the country. Making sure we're including Scotland and England and like, including
Well, if
England,
you're
England's always
coming to
included.
Scotland,
Yeah.
I will.
So yeah, we're trying to get
If you're
all the regions covered, not just England for once.
love it. Well, I'll be coming to get my book signed.
Yay!
If
That'd be
you're
great
in
to meet you.
Scotland, that's like so exciting. And I'll be sure to share as well. So if people keep an eye on my Instagram, if you've got events coming up, I will definitely be sharing
Oh,
them. And it's been absolutely fantastic to talk to you, Jen.
it's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. And enjoy the rest of your book launch day. I hope you have a
Thank
lovely time
you.
tonight.
Thank you. It's so exciting.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.